03:42 p.m., a single sheet of paper exits the secure shredder inside a temporary office 2 floors beneath the Washington Hilton. It doesn't fully disappear. One corner jams in the steel teeth. On that corner, still readable. Board of Peace, Provisional Attendee, Matrix. 4 names are blacked out. One isn't. A junior aide notices, freezes, and quietly pulls the paper free. 37 seconds later, the building's internal network registers an encrypted outbound ping routed through a server in Reykjavik. That ping becomes the first domino. By 03:44 p.m., 3 black SUVs reroute simultaneously from different parts of Washington. Their original destination, the West Wing visitor entrance. Their new destination, an unlisted service tunnel behind the Washington Convention Center. No sirens, no motorcade flags. Just silent acceleration and a sudden change in protocol. The drivers don't speak. They've already been told what the rest of the world will only hear hours later. Donald Trump is launching what he's calling the Board of Peace Summit, and it isn't being announced the way summits usually are. 03:47 p.m., a private jet registered to a Delaware shell company lifts off from Teterboro without a filed passenger manifest. Air traffic control logs the departure as routine repositioning. It isn't routine. On board is a delegation that officially does not exist yet. 2 former intelligence intermediaries, 1 sovereign wealth representative, and a political strategist who, until last week, was publicly denouncing the very idea of negotiations. Their phones are sealed in biometric lockboxes before takeoff. The pilot receives coordinates only after reaching 10,000 feet. Washington is not just preparing for a summit. It's preparing for something that looks more like a controlled detonation. 03:51 p.m. Inside a secured conference room 3 blocks from the Capitol, a wall-mounted screen flickers to life. A draft press release appears, then vanishes, replaced by a live feed of cable news speculation already spiraling ahead of any official confirmation. Someone in the room mutters, "We're late." They aren't late to a press cycle. They're late to a narrative war. Because the moment the phrase Board of Peace leaks, markets twitch, diplomatic backchannels ignite, and at least 4 foreign ministries activate contingency teams. The phrase itself is deceptively calm. The timing is not. 04:02 p.m., a staffer's smartwatch vibrates with a coded calendar update labeled simply Stage 0. It's not on any public schedule. Stage 0 means pre-announcement containment, the period where information moves faster than authority can shape it. In this window, allies scramble to understand their roles, while opponents calculate whether this summit is a genuine negotiation platform or a strategic spectacle designed to redraw influence lines before an election cycle fully ignites. Every minute without clarity multiplies the pressure. 04:11 p.m. A senior communications advisor receives a call that lasts exactly 9 seconds. No greeting, no sign-off, just one sentence. "The list you saw this morning is already obsolete." Then the line goes dead. The advisor stares at the wall for a full 10 seconds before opening a locked drawer and removing a second folder labeled Scenario C. Inside are 2 speech drafts. One for a triumphant diplomatic unveiling, the other for immediate damage control. Both are time-stamped for release within the same 24-hour window. Both cannot happen. Yet. 04:18 p.m. Across the Atlantic, a European policy unit flags the summit internally as a chain reaction event. That designation is rarely used. It means a single political move has the potential to trigger synchronized responses across finance, defense, and media ecosystems within 72 hours. The reason is simple. Nobody fully understands who is actually sitting on this proposed Board of Peace, or what concessions have already been promised behind closed doors to bring them there. By 04:26 p.m., Washington hasn't even seen the official stage set, but the machinery is already moving. Invitations are being confirmed through back channels older than modern diplomacy. Security perimeters are being drawn in invisible ink. And somewhere between shredded documents and silent takeoffs, a summit that could redefine alliances, or fracture them, has already begun. The public announcement is just the echo. 04:32 p.m., the first internal briefing memo labels the situation with a term rarely used outside intelligence circles, managed convergence. That phrase signals something deeper than a summit. It signals design. Because the Board of Peace isn't emerging from chaos, it's emerging from an invisible architecture built years in advance by three distinct power centers that learned long ago how to shape outcomes without appearing to control them. The first power player operates through political spectacle but thinks in terms of leverage. Trump's network isn't just a campaign machine or a former administration orbit. It's a parallel negotiation ecosystem that matured during years of sanctions wars, back-channel diplomacy, and media-first governance. Long before this summit appeared on any calendar, this network began constructing what insiders call a pressure lattice. The method was simple: maintain simultaneous lines of communication with actors who officially should never share a table. Former envoys, private intermediaries, sovereign fund advisors, all kept within reach but never fully aligned. The goal wasn't immediate peace, it was optionality. Years of cultivating unpredictable relationships created a moment where a single announcement could force rivals into the same gravitational field, whether they trusted the process or not. The second power player isn't a person, it's the permanent diplomatic security establishment inside Washington, an institution that survives elections, scandals, and ideological swings by mastering continuity. Its invisible architecture was laid down across decades through classified memorandums, defense cooperation agreements, and economic dependencies that quietly narrowed the range of possible moves any leader can make. Publicly, it reacts to events. Privately, it shapes the menu of responses long before events occur. Within this architecture, every crisis becomes an opportunity to reinforce relevance. A sudden Board of Peace summit doesn't just threaten instability, it threatens to bypass established channels. And nothing triggers institutional resistance faster than the prospect of being sidelined. The third power player exists offshore and off-camera: transnational financial and strategic stakeholders whose influence flows through capital rather than ballots. Sovereign wealth structures, energy consortiums, and private arbitration networks have spent the past decade constructing what can only be described as a shadow consensus system. They fund stability when stability serves markets and quietly fund disruption when disruption resets leverage. Their invisible architecture relies on timing. They don't create events. They wait until political actors create events. Then they move first, locking in positions before governments fully grasp what's happening. For them, a summit branded as peace is less about diplomacy and more about recalibrating risk portfolios tied to regions perpetually on the brink. 04:49 p.m. When these three power centers intersect, history begins to echo. The first echo traces back to a negotiation in the late Cold War era when unofficial envoys created a parallel channel that ultimately forced formal diplomats to accept terms already shaped behind the scenes. Defiance from within the system didn't survive long. Careers stalled, access vanished. The lesson embedded itself deep within institutional memory. When parallel structures gain momentum, resistance is quietly neutralized rather than publicly confronted. The second echo surfaces in the early 2000s when a coalition of financial and political actors orchestrated a stabilization initiative that looked cooperative on the surface but functionally locked smaller states into compliance through debt restructuring and security guarantees. Leaders who challenged the framework found themselves isolated economically within months, not through overt punishment, through procedural delays, credit tightening, and sudden regulatory scrutiny. The machinery never announced retaliation. It simply adjusted pressure until resistance became unsustainable. The third echo is more recent, a diplomatic initiative that began as a public peace forum but evolved into a mechanism for reassigning influence zones under the language of cooperation. Those who refused to participate discovered that non-participation itself became a liability. Trade channels narrowed, intelligence sharing slowed, invitations to key forums stopped arriving. The message was never spoken aloud. Alignment is optional, but exclusion has consequences. 05:07 p.m. Inside Washington's institutional core, the psychology of the moment is defined by a single instinct: preserve continuity. Institutions do not fear chaos as much as they fear irrelevance. When an external initiative like the Board of Peace appears capable of rewriting negotiation pathways, the internal response is not open confrontation. It is procedural absorption. Committees form, oversight frameworks expand, briefings multiply. Each step subtly pulls the initiative back into established channels until what began as an outsider's maneuver becomes indistinguishable from the system itself. This is where silent compliance takes hold. Mid-level officials, analysts, and advisors recognize the stakes immediately. Some privately question the summit's motives or timing. Few voice those concerns openly, not because dissent is forbidden, but because the architecture rewards alignment. Promotions depend on stability. Access depends on trust. In high-stakes environments, survival often means adapting faster than the situation changes. Silence becomes a form of participation. 05:21 p.m., a secure group chat among senior policy staff lights up with a single directive: assume inevitability. That phrase carries weight. It means the summit is no longer being treated as a speculative event, but as a structural shift that must be integrated rather than resisted. Once inevitability enters the conversation, the machinery of compliance accelerates. Briefing documents are rewritten to frame the summit as complementary rather than disruptive. Risk assessments are adjusted to highlight opportunities instead of threats. Language evolves in real time to make an unexpected initiative feel preordained. 05:34 p.m. Beyond Washington, allied capitals begin mirroring the same psychological adjustment. Publicly cautious, privately adaptive. No one wants to be the last actor to recognize a new alignment forming. Because in geopolitical systems, timing determines leverage. Recognize a shift early and you shape it. Recognize it late and you live within it. And so, beneath the public narrative of a peace summit, the invisible architecture hums. Three power players moving through frameworks built years ago, historical echoes reinforcing the cost of defiance, institutions recalibrating not through confrontation but through absorption. By the time the first official statement reaches the public, the real negotiation won't be about peace terms. It will be about who ultimately controls the structure that defines them. 06:02 p.m. The doors close without a sound, no press, no photographers, only a small brass placard outside the conference suite reading, "Private event or maintenance." Inside, 12 seats form a precise rectangle around a matte black table. No national flags, no official insignias, just nameplates printed in identical font stripped of titles. The absence of ceremony is deliberate. Ceremony implies accountability. This room operates on deniability. A secure phone jammer hums softly in the ceiling panels. Every device placed on the table has already been cleared, cloned, or replaced. An aide moves clockwise, collecting watches and sliding them into a lead-lined box. When the last click echoes, a senior facilitator speaks without introducing himself. 06:03 p.m. We are now off the record. On the far side of the table sits the figure insiders call the ideologue, a policy architect whose influence doesn't come from office, but from doctrine. He believes the Board of Peace must become a structural reset, not a temporary negotiation. To his right sits the opportunist, a political operator focused on immediate leverage, polling trajectories, and narrative dominance. Between them, three intermediaries representing financial and security interests exchange silent glances. The air feels less like diplomacy and more like controlled detonation. The facilitator slides a slim folder to the center. Before we begin, we need alignment on scope. The ideologue leans forward first. His voice is calm, measured, almost academic. Scope was decided years ago. This summit isn't symbolic, it's corrective. We stabilize the system now, or we spend the next decade reacting to fragmentation. The opportunist doesn't look at him. He flips through the folder instead, scanning bullet points. Stabilization doesn't win elections. Outcomes do. Optics do. If this turns into a lecture series on global order, we lose the moment. A pause. Not uncomfortable. Calculated. One of the intermediaries clears her throat. We're not here to debate philosophy. We're here to prevent misalignment that could trigger unintended disclosures. That word lands heavily. Disclosures. Everyone in the room knows what it refers to, but no one says it yet. 06:11 p.m. The first friction point emerges when the facilitator projects a timeline onto the wall. 3 phases: pre-announcement containment, controlled reveal, structural commitments. The ideologue nods approvingly. The opportunist taps a pen against the table. You're assuming cooperation, he says, from allies, from markets, from media. That's not how this works anymore. You don't get buy-in by presenting architecture. You get buy-in by presenting inevitability. The ideologue finally turns toward him. Inevitability without structure is chaos, and structure without momentum is irrelevant, the opportunist fires back. The room goes still. This isn't a disagreement about messaging. It's a disagreement about reality itself. 06:18 p.m. A second folder appears, thicker, marked with a single red line across the cover. The facilitator doesn't slide this one to the center. He keeps his hand on it. There's a development, he says quietly. Received at 05:52 p.m. through a secure intermediary. He opens the folder just enough for the top sheet to show, not text, a waveform printout, audio. The ideologue's expression doesn't change, but his fingers tighten around a pen. The opportunist finally looks up. Source? He asks. Verified, the facilitator replies. Cross-checked, time-stamped last week. The intermediary on the left exhales slowly. Play it. 06:20 p.m. The recording begins. A voice fills the room, familiar to everyone present, calm, confident, unaware it was being captured. It discusses pre-commitments tied to the summit, concessions offered privately to secure attendance from a key external bloc, concessions that, if revealed prematurely, would ignite backlash across multiple fronts. The voice outlines sequencing strategies, media handling, even contingency narratives if leaks occur. When the audio ends, no one speaks for 8 full seconds. The opportunist breaks the silence first. So we're already exposed. Not exposed, the facilitator corrects. Contained, for now. The ideologue closes his eyes briefly, processing. Who else has it? Unknown, the intermediary answers. But the existence of the recording changes leverage dynamics immediately. 6:27 p.m. The power in the room shifts. Until this moment, the summit's architects controlled the timeline. Now the timeline is conditional. The ideologue adjusts his posture, recalibrating. We proceed as planned, he says. Acceleration only increases risk. The opportunist shakes his head. No, we move faster. Announce before anyone else defines the narrative. Frame concessions as strategic vision instead of reactive compromise. And if the full recording surfaces, the ideologue counters, then it surfaces into a narrative we already own, the opportunist replies. You don't outrun exposure by slowing down. You outrun it by getting ahead of it. 6:34 p.m. Voices overlap. Not shouting but sharp. Precise. The intermediaries exchange notes in near silence while the facilitator watches, letting the friction reveal priorities. One side seeks controlled stability. The other seeks decisive momentum. Both understand the stakes. Whoever defines the first public interpretation of the Board of Peace will shape its legitimacy for years. Finally, the facilitator raises a hand. The room quiets instantly. There is a third path, he says. Selective disclosure. He taps the folder containing the waveform. Release a fragment. Not enough to reveal concessions. Enough to demonstrate initiative. We create the perception of transparency before anyone can weaponize opacity, the ideologue considers. That risks normalizing surveillance within the process. The opportunist leans back slightly. It also neutralizes anyone planning to leak the full version. Once we control the first impression, the rest becomes context. U06:42 p.m. A vote without formal voting begins. Eye contact, subtle nods, calculations unfolding in silence. One by one, the intermediaries signal conditional agreement. The ideologue hesitates longest. Then, slowly, he nods once. Controlled release, he says, but only after structural commitments are locked. The opportunist allows himself a faint smile, not victory, advantage. 06:49 p.m. The facilitator closes the red-lined folder. Then we have alignment. Phase shift begins tonight. Chairs move. Devices are returned. Watches reattached. But before anyone stands fully, the opportunist speaks again, almost casually. One more thing. Once this goes live, there's no perimeter. Analysts, independent researchers, digital investigators, they'll all start connecting dots. The only way to stay ahead is to make them feel like they're part of the inner circle. He glances toward the blank wall where briefing screens usually display. Information control isn't about secrecy anymore, he continues. It's about selective inclusion. You let the right observers believe they're seeing what others can't. They become invested in the process. They defend it because they feel inside it. 06:52 p.m. The facilitator nods slowly. An intelligence circle. Exactly, the opportunist says. You don't just manage the summit, you manage the audience that tracks it. He looks directly at the others, because the moment people feel like insiders, they stop watching passively. They start protecting access. 6:55 p.m. The meeting adjourns without ceremony. The recording remains locked in its folder, now the most valuable leverage point in the room. Outside, Washington continues its normal evening rhythm, unaware that within 1 hour, the first controlled narrative fragments will begin surfacing, carefully calibrated to pull observers closer rather than push them away. And somewhere between disclosure and design, a new kind of audience is being formed, not spectators, participants, the ones who pay attention early, the ones who recognize patterns before they become headlines, the ones who understand that in moments like this, information isn't just power, it's membership. 07:18 p.m. The first controlled leak doesn't appear in Washington. It surfaces on a European financial terminal used by only a few thousand high-level subscribers. A short, cryptic briefing note. Unscheduled convergence event in D.C. Multilateral risk recalibration expected. No names, no confirmation. But within 6 minutes, currency futures twitch. Energy derivatives shift half a point. Someone, somewhere, is repositioning before the public even knows what's happening. 07:26 p.m. A political editor in London receives an anonymous email containing a single sentence. Watch Washington tonight. Peace is being negotiated like a hostile takeover. No attachments, no signature, just enough intrigue to trigger quiet verification calls. By 07:31 p.m., 3 major newsrooms have activated overnight teams. They don't have confirmation yet, but they have pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is often faster than official announcements. The internal war is no longer contained inside secure rooms. It's bleeding outward through signals too subtle for headlines, but too synchronized to ignore. And once signals reach markets, media, and foreign ministries simultaneously, containment becomes mathematically fragile. 07:39 p.m. Factor 1 begins tightening its grip. Mathematical inevitability. Too many actors now know that something structural is unfolding. In complex systems, once awareness crosses a certain threshold, suppression becomes statistically impossible. Analysts compare notes. Diplomats request clarifications. Investors hedge positions. Each action creates data. Each data point attracts more scrutiny. The summit's existence moves from rumor to probability to near certainty without a single official confirmation. The numbers alone guarantee exposure. 07:52 p.m. Factor 2 emerges quietly but decisively. Legal encirclement. Within the U.S., oversight bodies begin requesting preliminary briefings under routine procedural authority. Nothing confrontational. Just formal inquiries framed as standard governance, but every inquiry creates documentation. Every document creates discoverability. Internationally, allied governments initiate their own compliance reviews, citing treaty obligations and disclosure requirements. No one is accusing. No one is blocking. They're simply activating frameworks that ensure no major diplomatic initiative can remain entirely opaque. The effect is subtle but relentless. A tightening ring of lawful scrutiny that limits how much can remain hidden and for how long. U8:06 p.m. Factor 3 cuts deeper. Institutional betrayal. Not dramatic betrayal. Procedural betrayal. Mid-level officials across multiple agencies begin quietly sharing fragments with trusted counterparts outside their immediate chains of command. Not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. When a structural shift looms, no one wants to be the last to know or the first to be blamed. Information flows laterally, then outward, forming an informal safety net of shared awareness. The very institutions designed to maintain cohesion begin distributing knowledge in self-defense. Containment erodes from within. 08:19 p.m. And yet the most dangerous response isn't loud opposition, it's silence. Strategic, disciplined silence from rival political factions and external stakeholders who recognize an advantage in waiting. They practice what seasoned operators call political aikido, using the momentum of the summit's architects against them. Instead of attacking the initiative directly, they allow it to expand, to accumulate commitments, to generate expectations. The heavier it becomes, the harder it will fall if contradictions surface. A senior foreign policy advisor in one allied capital summarizes the approach in a private message. Do nothing, let them define everything, then hold them to it. 8:27 p.m. Media panels begin speculating cautiously, noting unusual travel patterns and closed-door preparations. No one states conclusions outright, but the narrative perimeter is forming. Each mention adds weight. Each unanswered question adds pressure. The summit's architects intended to control timing through selective disclosure. Instead, timing is being stretched by external observation. Every hour without full clarity invites interpretation. Every interpretation narrows maneuvering space. 8:36 p.m. Opponents continue their disciplined quiet. No press conferences, no condemnations, just patient observation while procedural frameworks and public curiosity tighten simultaneously. It's a classic encirclement strategy. Allow the initiative to move forward, then use its own scale and promises to constrain it. The more ambitious the Board of Peace appears, the more accountability it attracts. The more accountability it attracts, the less room its architects have to adjust without scrutiny. 8:44 p.m. Somewhere inside Washington, a monitoring dashboard tracks global mentions of the summit across languages and platforms. The curve is rising faster than projected, not explosive yet, but exponential curves rarely look dangerous at the beginning. They look manageable, predictable, until they're not. Because once internal conflict begins leaking into external systems, control doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes incrementally, through mathematics, through law, through the quiet redistribution of information. And by the time the architects realize how wide the circle has become, stepping outside it is no longer an option. 09:02 p.m. A final internal briefing begins circulating through encrypted channels labeled simply, War Game, 30-Day Horizon. It isn't a public strategy, it's a survival map. Because by this hour, everyone inside the Board of Peace ecosystem understands the same reality. The summit is no longer just a diplomatic initiative. It's a live structural gamble, and every gamble requires contingency. The document outlines a three-stage plan designed not for success, but for survival. Stage 1 activates immediately. Days 1 through 10. The objective is narrative capture before structural exposure. Every appearance, leak, and controlled disclosure must reinforce inevitability. The perception that the Board of Peace is already functioning, already shaping outcomes, already too embedded to reverse. If momentum holds through the first 10 days, early opposition fragments. Media framing stabilizes, markets adapt, the system begins absorbing the initiative as if it always existed. Survival probability for Stage 1, 72%, high but conditional. Because this stage depends entirely on timing, one uncontrolled revelation, one contradictory statement, and inevitability fractures into uncertainty.